Everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is March the 24th, 2022. I'm Barry Stagner, and if you caught our little infomercial earlier in the day, just want to remind you of a couple of opportunities that are coming up, and that is this Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time. Amir Sarfati, Jan Markel, Michael Lay, and myself will be holding another roundtable discussion, and this week's topic is going to be silence in the pulpit, or the silent pulpit is actually the title for this particular session. And, you know, we're constantly hearing from wherever we may be in the world that nobody or few are teaching Bible prophecy. And boy, living in the age that we live in, pastors out there and leaders and teachers need to be talking about what's happening. We've all mentioned before, and it's worthy of mention again, you know, some 27% or 8,100 and change verses out of the 32,000 in the Bible are related to Bible prophecy. Many of them, which again, prove that the Bible is living and powerful, have been fulfilled at the first coming of Jesus, but there are a host of things happening that tell us our redemption is near, and we need to be talking about them. So we'll be discussing the matter of the silent pulpit this Saturday, 10 a.m. on the Behold Israel platforms, as well as mine, and you can join us there, and I encourage you to do so. And then I want to let you know, if you didn't catch it this morning or whatever time you watched what I aired earlier today, we're going to be teaching a message on Sunday titled Prophecy Perplexities. And the reason for this is that there are often questions that come up, and I see things repeatedly posted online and in chats when we're doing a live about multiple questions, and they come up time and time again. And anytime anybody mentions the rapture or anything that would be a sign related to it, at least indicating that it's near, somebody throws out there, no one knows the day or the hour. Well, what exactly does that mean? We'll talk about that. What is it that we can know, even though we don't know and can't know the day or the hour? Then we'll talk about some other issues related to the Ezekiel war scenario. We're going to talk about Isaiah 17:1. We'll talk some about the defection from truth in the church and things of this nature. And so I encourage you to join us right here, Facebook Live on Sunday morning. You can watch live at 7:45, 9:30, and 11:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time, or you can hang on and catch it on Monday when it posts on YouTube, or you can go and watch live at cctustin.org, cctustin.org. That's the church website. And again, 7:45, 9:30, and 11:30 for a message titled Prophecy perplexities. And perplexities just means things that can cause confusion. And there are oftentimes just that regarding some of the things reported about Bible prophecies. So let's jump into our stories this week. And of course, we need to talk about Ukraine. Got a pair of stories that will start our evening off from the Wall Street Journal. And the first is, the headline reads, NATO estimates steep Russian losses in Ukraine as Biden heads to Europe. NATO estimates Russia may have lost as much as 1/5 of its combat forces in about a month of fighting in Ukraine as President Biden and alliance leaders gather in Brussels for a summit to discuss providing further support to Kiev to repel the Russian invasion. Up to 40,000 Russian troops have been killed, wounded, taken prisoner, or are missing in Ukraine, said a senior military official from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Russia may have lost 10% of its equipment, impairing Moscow's ability to maintain its pace of operations, said another NATO official. The casualty count would underscore how much Russia's attack on Ukraine that began on February 24 has become bogged down after what defense analysts have said have been a series of operational missteps. Ukrainian defense operations have emerged as a far tougher and enduring group than was expected. And I would say tanks running out of gas on the way to their destination or the battle theater would be a rather significant miscalculation or misstep. NATO officials said on Thursday that they are expected to further ratchet up the pressure on Russia when alliance leaders meet in Brussels. We are determined to do all we can to support Ukraine, according to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Said on Wednesday, I expect allies will agree to provide additional support, including cybersecurity assistance, as well as equipment to help Ukraine protect against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. Now, that one statement there is of interest, including cybersecurity assistance. And, one of the things I like to draw our attention to is the fact that, and we'll talk about this in our last story, we live in the age of mechanized warfare. And not only are we in the mechanized warfare age, but we're in the tech age of warfare as well. And cybersecurity, cyber warfare, and all these things are terms that are recently new, introduced into basically military activity on the world. They've never been anything, or in the world, and never been anything that is mentioned in time past, but they do have a significant role to play. We know technology is going to play a role during the tribulation period. We know there's going to be an image created by humans that has life given to it, or breath given to it. At least it seems to be so. We know that only God is the creator of life, and Satan cannot do that. He can only mimic. But there is going to be some type of life-like being that is created, fashioned by the hands of men through technology during the last days. We've had lots of stories in the past about artificial intelligence and its development there. And one interesting statement, I think we all know who Elon Musk is and what an interesting character he is. But he made a statement, I think, that is quite telling. He said we should be much more afraid of artificial intelligence than nuclear weapons. And to that, I think there is an end that potentially could play out in upcoming war scenarios, even and including during the tribulation, which would explain why some of these battles that are fought in this age of technological and mechanized warfare are fought on foot with horsemen and other things of that nature. So, but obviously, the mention of this, I think, is noteworthy and worthy of a pause. That is part of warfare today. You have to have cybersecurity because somebody could hack your equipment, your guidance systems, and basically disable you completely from participating in defending yourself. Now, we also have a second story, as I said, and the impact, the global impact of this Russia-Ukraine military exchange is spreading and affecting literally every aspect of life. And the first, obviously, is related to energy products. And the Wall Street Journal says Russia's oil and gas industry is starting to feel the bite of sanctions. Now, there's a flip side to this as well. We'll talk about in a moment. President Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine and the wave of Western sanctions in response is starting to hit Russia's economic engine in its prodigious oil and gas industry. The U.S. and Canada have barred the little Russian oil they import, while the European Union is considering a ban. But for the most part, Western sanctions have so far avoided directly limiting most of Russia's energy exports. Now, remember, we've said this, I don't know how many times, 60% of the gross domestic product in Russia is related to energy products, natural gas, petroleum products, and exporting that is what feeds their economy. U.S. and EU restrictions, though, have already cut off Russia's access to funding and advanced technology to develop and maintain its aging fields. An exodus of Western energy companies, meanwhile, is disrupting major projects from the Arctic to the Pacific Ocean. Traders and banks, meanwhile, have been shunning Russian oil cargoes in recent weeks. All that is threatening Russian oil production, which represents 1 in every 10 barrels. You get that? 1 in every 10 barrels comes out of Russia. Pumped globally, other sanctioned petrostates like Iran and Venezuela have struggled to recover from the big hit to production such restrictions have caused. Analysts warn Russia could too. This will set the industry back many years, said Mikhail Krudikin, a partner at the independent consulting firm Rus Energy, who advises Russian oil companies. It means loss of competitiveness. Now, this is interesting because I personally think that it's very possible that this competitive issue and infiltration into the European market by Israeli gas and oil products could very well be the hook in the jaw that draws the invading nations led by Russia into the northern border of Israel and on into the country, only to die and lay dead on the mountains of Israel, as the Ezekiel war scenario proposes. But, recognizing all of these things, that it is having an impact on the Russian economy. It is having an impact on their ability to export, and some of the monetary freezes and bank sanctions and other things that have been forced upon them are having an impact. But the impact is not just on them, and we'll talk about that here as we continue. The Algemeiner Israeli newspaper, online paper that is, says that Putin is blackmailing you. Top Ukrainian rabbi urges Israel to recognize the threat posed by Russia. Now, this is the big question. Is this going to lead to the invasion of Israel, as we just mentioned a moment ago? And here a rabbi in Ukraine urges Israel to recognize Russia's threat on their sovereign territory. And Ukraine's chief rabbi has criticized the government of Israel for being insufficiently disapproving of Russian President Vladimir Putin's regime, insisting at the same time that Russia's relationship with terrorist organizations in the Middle East make it an adversary of the Jewish state. Well, we do know that with the names that are groups that are named in the Ezekiel war scenario, that Russia and Iran and Turkey and Libya and Sudan will be the participants. So there's no question that Russia has an ongoing relationship with terrorist nations. And it's been well said and oft repeated that Iran is the world's largest sponsor of terrorism. And Russia has a very definite tie with them that continues throughout this particular period. I speak on Israeli television and on radio almost every day, Rabbi Moshe Osman told the NV Ukraine news outlet. I said, Putin doesn't take you into account on anything. Putin accepts all kinds of enemies of Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, and he says that they are friends. Israeli policy toward Ukraine has come under increasing scrutiny in the wake of President Volodymyr Zelensky's speech to the Knesset on Sunday. The Ukrainian government has been urging Israel to supply its armed forces with weaponry and impose tougher sanctions on Russia. Osman said that he understood that Israel, which is dealing with the Russian military presence supporting the regime of President Bashar al-Assad in neighboring Syria, was in a difficult situation fighting for its existence. However, Putin is blackmailing Israel with Syria, Hezbollah, and Iran, he argued. He said he had called on Israel to supply Ukraine with its Iron Dome anti-missile system. This is not an offensive weapon. It's for defense and protection of civilians, Osman said. Israel does not give because Putin is pressuring them. Various questions have been raised by defense experts over the potential effectiveness of the Iron Dome for Ukraine's defense, among them logistical challenge of transporting its components into the country while circumventing Russian forces. Extensive training in its use would also be required. In addition, some experts believe the Iron Dome system would not guard against much of Russia's wide-ranging arsenal of missiles and artillery. So this rabbi is on the nose, as they would say, and there should be concern in Israel. And, it's been interesting to see Naftali Bennett try and play mediator between Ukraine and Russia. And again, obviously, we do know what's coming. There's no question about it. And let me just pause and say that's one of the great things about studying the Bible and Bible prophecies. We know what's coming. We know to a degree who the players are. We don't know exactly how things are going to develop. And I always look back on the fact that we would ask the question throughout the years, okay, we know there's going to be a hook in the jaw. We know these countries are going to be drawn down from the north, which means Lebanon or Syria. Those two states or countries occupy and share a northern border with Israel. So how in the world are these nations going to wind up in those particular territories? And we know that the Iranians have as a proxy Hezbollah. And we know that they support the efforts in Gaza. And we also know that there is a Turkish and Iranian and Russian presence on the border of Israel inside of Syria. And what was the mechanism that got them there? Well, it was ISIS. They went there to fight ISIS. And again, interesting how the Bible develops and knows things from the past and the future with just specific clarity. And yet we don't know all the spokes on the wheel, so to speak, but it's all going to happen. There's no question about it. And interesting, some of the other things that are going on regarding the Russian-Ukraine battle that is taking place there for the survival of this nation that's been attacked by the bear, Russia. And there for a while, you could not access the Russian Times, but I was able to snag a couple articles out of there over the past couple of days. And here's some of the other relations that or issues that are related to the natural gas and petroleum products coming out of Russia. And this headline reads from the Russian Times: ruble rockets on gas currency switch. The ruble has surged on Wednesday after an announcement that payments for gas exports to certain Western countries will be switched to Russia's domestic currency. The Russian currency immediately rose to a 3-week high of 95 rubles against the dollar before settling below 100. It also gained 3.5% against the EU's currency, trading at 110.5 rubles per euro. The ruble plunged to historic lows earlier this month as unprecedented Western sanctions hit the Russian economy, dropping to record lows of 132 rubles per dollar and 147 rubles per euro on March 7th. In mid-February, the currency's exchange rate was around 75 rubles per dollar and 85 rubles per euro. Russia plans to abandon all compromised currencies in gas payment settlements, President Vladimir Putin said on Wednesday. He added that illegitimate decisions by a number of Western countries to freeze Russia's assets destroyed all confidence in their currencies, and therefore unfriendly countries will have to pay for Russian gas in rubles, Putin said. The Russian president instructed the central bank and the government to determine within a week the order of operations for the purchase of rubles on the domestic market of buyers of Russian gas. And Putin added that Russia will continue to supply gas in accordance with the volumes and according to the pricing principles concluded in the contracts. Only the currency of payment will change. Interesting. We've seen much of the efforts of the China and Russia to move away from petrodollars that feed U.S. Currency. And, I think there's a 17 billion black ink transition for just changing the currencies of the world into petrodollars. The U.S. makes some $17 billion a year off of that. To say nothing of the other elements of it. And now moving away from that, it will definitely have an impact on, 17 billion in a world where multi-trillion-dollar budgets are proposed. Isn't a whole lot of money, but it's still going to have an impact and could move the rest of the world away from the petrodollar to different individual currencies of countries, which would have an impact. Now, another story along the same lines comes again from the Russian Times, and the headline reads, Moscow warns Europe of energy market collapse. And again, trying to control things as related to the products that feed their economy is one of the goals of Russia. And, they're really basically holding Europe hostage and holding, them being able to keep themselves warm or cool or fuel their cars, because we know that they are a major supplier of natural gas as well as petroleum products into the European markets. And Russia warns of this market collapse. And the exchange price for gas in Europe, the article says, at the level of 4,000 per 1,000 cubic meters is not the limit. As the volume at storage facilities is significantly lower than last year, the Russian Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Energy Minister Alexander Novak said on Wednesday. According to him, the ban on Russian oil and gas imports could result in a crash of Europe's energy market. It's absolutely obvious that without Russian hydrocarbons, if sanctions are imposed, the gas and oil markets will collapse. The rise in prices for energy resources can be unpredictable, Novak said. And he pointed out that Washington's ban on Russian oil and petroleum products has already led to an increase in fuel prices in the U.S. of some 19%. At the same time, the share of domestic energy resources in the U.S. is only 3% of Russian exports. Our partners are trying to shift their problems associated with rising prices onto Russia, although obviously our country has nothing to do with the crisis, Novak said. He stressed that Russia has never used energy resources as a weapon, and that gas supplies to Europe are currently being carried out in accordance with contracts despite the difficult geopolitical situation. A bumper sticker that somebody had in their office cubicle years ago comes to mind with that last statement, and that is, I can tell you're lying because your lips are moving. Russia has constantly held the energy products that they would basically sell to the European market hostage and ran the prices up or threatened to turn off the gas in the middle of winter. And, of course, we know this is what communist countries do. And, those who are tyrants and dictators as well use those types of things to control the masses. And they have absolutely done that in the past. And the Deputy Prime Minister also said that the EU's cancellation of the Nord Stream 2 gas project has already led to a huge increase in gas prices, while oil has soared by 40% due to the sanctions. The EU is heavily reliant on Russian fossil fuels. Around, get this, 90% of the gas used in the EU is imported. According to the European Commission, Russia provides roughly 45% of these imports at various levels to EU member states in 2021. So Europe cannot afford to lose this, and decrease in 45% of your petroleum supply and natural gas supply would indeed be devastating. And the whole point of this is that the Deputy Prime Minister is making a threat in this article. And he is, talking about the impact of the sanctions in the U.S. and the U.S. not buying any more Russian oil really doesn't have any effect on them. It's only 3% of their exports, but that's a different story in Europe. And Europe will, if they want to keep people cooking their food and driving their cars, they're going to be at the mercy of the Russians to a degree. The Russian Times also reports one of Europe's biggest car plants halts production. And one of the biggest vehicle manufacturing plants in Europe, Volkswagen in Bratislava, has suspended production due to interruptions to its supply parts from Ukraine and other issues, Slovakian media reported on Tuesday. Production across all areas was stopped on Monday for 2 days due to a long-term lack of semiconductor components and a partial supply outage of some parts from Ukraine. Slovakian press agency TASR quoted company spokeswoman Lucia Makayova as saying, and the company has been affected by the shortage of semiconductor components caused by the coronavirus pandemic, forcing it to discontinue production several times last year, with other Slovak car makers experiencing similar problems. According to German outlet Finizen.net, the current crisis in Ukraine is hindering the delivery of some parts to the Slovak manufacturer. The Volkswagen Bratislava factory and two smaller locations in Slovakia employ roughly 12,000 people and are currently building the VW Touareg, the Porsche Cayenne, the Audi Q7 and Q8, as well as the VW Up, the Seat MI, and the Skoda Citigo. And last week, BMW and Volkswagen halted manufacturing in some of their plants in Europe due to interruptions in the supply of low-cost parts from Ukraine. So, this is important for us to recognize the impact that this is having, even though this is a single country in a world, where there's 200 countries, or I can't remember the exact number, forgive me. But, looking at what's having such a global impact from this invasion of Ukraine and the desired expansion of Mother Russia and getting back to the way things were in Russia's quote unquote glory days, as Putin's aspirations are, is having a global impact. And we have to remember that these things are going to be manifested at their fullness during the tribulation period. Inflation will be to the degree that a single meal will cost a day's pay under the rider of the black horse in the tribulation scenario. And, we're seeing the potential precursors to this. And it's interesting to see so many things that are going to reach their ultimate fulfillment during the tribulation beginning to stir, if you will. There's a stirring in the water, and these impacts of this invasion are truly global and impacting other countries and their production abilities. And when you pair this with the COVID pandemic and all the other things that have been created by that, people not being able to go to work and all the other things that we've seen, and the shortages and the supply chain issues that we're seeing happen now, it is, as I like to say, all the spokes on the wheel are in place, and every wheel on the prophetic car is turning, and we are moving toward the ultimate and in the fulfillment of these things during the tribulation period. The Jewish News Syndicate is reporting, and through a question on their headline, must Bennett wave the white flag on a new Iran deal? As far as Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is concerned, there's no point in getting into a fight you can't win. Given the Biden administration's unshakable commitment to cutting a deal with Iran that will revive the 2015 nuclear agreement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, he's right that the chances of stopping this disaster from happening are slim and none. Well, while he may think he's saving himself a lot of trouble and perhaps even gaining some credit with President Joe Biden to cash in during a future crisis, giving up even before the battle has even formally begun is not a wise strategy that he thinks it is. More importantly, his decision will have implications not just for Israel, but for Americans who wish to mount a campaign against his policy or to reverse it that he and friends of the Jewish state will have good cause to regret. Speaking on Monday, Bennett sounded a familiar theme to those who have followed his attempts to justify his journey from a position to the right of the Likud party to one in which he is now in a coalition with left-wingers and even Arab Islamists. He says his predecessor, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, not only failed to stop former President Barack Obama from getting his way on Iran, but that after that, ears in Washington were closed on all other matters. Now, we do know that this does have a far-reaching impact, including the U.S. relationship with the Saudis. And we've all seen and heard articles where the Saudis aren't returning phone calls from this administration because of this effort to move forward. And we know the Saudis very wisely are extremely suspicious of Iran, and they know full well what their aspirations are to establish a caliphate and bring about an apocalypse that the 12th Imam or the Mahdi will rise up and bring an end to and bring the world under the submission, which, by the way, the word Islam means submission, bring the world under submission to Islam. And they know that they desire this to be under a Shia-dominant system rather than a Sunni like the Saudis are. So there's major aggression between the Saudis and the Iranians, and basically to make this move and to allow them to continue to enrich uranium and move toward a weapons grade enriched uranium to where they can mount it on some of the missiles they've been testing that could reach into Israel and other places. This is a grave matter of concern for countries other than just Israel. And we seem to be in a new era of kind of setting things up, I think, for the Antichrist on levels that maybe we never expected. Because we have to remember that basically the Antichrist, and what we're told in Revelation chapter 6, verse 2, is when this man rides on the scene, and you pair that with Daniel chapter 11, that he's going to be a smooth-talking flatterer. In other words, he's going to be a diplomat. And he is going to deceive the world, Daniel says, through intrigue, and that's smooth speech. And so he's going to talk the world into a covenant that he makes with Israel, and it being a positive thing. And we know that his plans ultimately are to declare himself to be God. But, really it's amazing to see, especially in this country, the fact that we are a country that has fought on behalf of other countries on foreign soil, shed American blood for the sake of the blood of other peoples, to free them from oppression and all that. And now, we basically decided that we're going to be a country of diplomacy, and we will sanction and this and that, and rather than stand up and fight. And, this is feeding into that whole package that the Antichrist is going to come and sell. Let's make this agreement with Israel. Let's let them build their temple. And it's possible that this is the end result of the Ezekiel war, where he's going to rise up on the world scene and say, you know what, enough is enough. Let's fix this Middle East crisis. We've got all these armies laying dead on the mountains of Israel. It takes 7 months to bury them. Let's just get this covenant signed. Let's get a temple built, and let's just negotiate a deal that's going to work for everybody. And we are seeing that really kind of come into play now and become the primary means of resolving global conflicts. The Jerusalem Post is reporting that Bennett, Mohammed bin Zayed, Sisi Sharm summit sends a message to Washington on Iran. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Crown Prince Abu Dhabi Mohammed bin Zayed arrived in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, with a shared gripe. The U.S. is conceding too much to Iran. There have been long been concerns that while the U.S. was discussing Iran talks with Israel and its Gulf allies, it was not really listening and not taking their security needs seriously. The latest is that the Biden administration is considering removing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is behind the proxies such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, from the U.S. foreign terrorist organizations list as a side deal to the nuclear talks. In exchange, Washington asked Iran to commit to de-escalation in the Middle East and specifically not to attack Americans in the region. It was the last point that stung in particular. We believe that the United States will not abandon its closest allies in exchange for empty promises from terrorists, Bennett and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said over the weekend in their most strongly worded statement on the Iran talks so far. The United Arab Emirates, or the UAE, was shocked by the Americans' plan to delist the IRGC, a source in Abu Dhabi said. But they, together with Saudi Arabia, began showing their disappointment weeks ago in a way that has reverberated more than a pointed statement. Abu Dhabi and Riyadh have been very frustrated with what they view as a weak American response to the wave of missile and drone attacks by the Iran-backed Yemeni Houthis rebels on their countries that began in January, in addition to how the nuclear talks are progressing. So when Washington came knocking on their doors, first to condemn Russia at the UN Security Council, then to turn on the spigot of oil following sanctions on Russia's energy sector, MBZ and MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, as the crown princes of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, as they're respectively known, were too busy to take U.S. President Joe Biden's call. The UAE took their displays of dissatisfaction even farther this week, hosting isolated Syrian President Bashar Assad. The only other countries Assad has visited since he massacred his own people beginning in 2011 are Russia and Iran. Jerusalem's feelings on the Assad meeting are mixed. There are no warm feelings between Israel and the butcher of Damascus, but his greater acceptance in the Arab world could mean a weaker Iranian presence over Israel's northern border. Bennett left his meeting with MBZ, in which the topic arose, with food for thought. The State Department said it was profoundly disappointed and troubled by the Assad-MBZ meeting, and that's an understatement. Washington viewed the meeting with alarm, though. Let's face it, not enough alarm to actually engage in some self-reflection and change its tact in the Middle East. Bennett has found himself in the same situation as MBZ, seeing the U.S. take steps that endanger his country's security, but is the one responding in a quieter, more moderate way. And again, this is so critically important for us to understand, because Zechariah 12:3 says all the nations of the earth are going to be against Jerusalem ultimately, and during the tribulation period, this will be fulfilled. And it's no surprise to see the U.S. taking some of the positions that it's taking, even though it's tragic and heartbreaking. And we do know that many Israeli prime ministers and ranking officials in Israel have said, that the Christian church in the United States, evangelical Christians in the United States, are their greatest ally and asset. So outside of those in their own country. So again, this is heartbreaking to see the U.S. take such a position, such a soft position, and especially it just displays just a complete ignorance of how the Middle East operates, and the fact that, the very fact that Islam, as I mentioned a moment ago, means submission, tells you what their thinking is and how they believe things need to be brought to pass, and that is through strength and force. Now, Zero Hedge says that the death toll rises to over 12 million chickens and turkeys in the second month of America's horrific bird flu pandemic. And I like how this article starts, because most of you have probably not heard that. But the article says, everyone needs to start paying attention to this crisis, because America's rapidly growing bird flu pandemic is going to deeply affect all of us at the grocery store. This pandemic began on February 8th when a confirmed case of HPAI was confirmed in a domestic flock. And on March 9th, an article was published that discussed the fact that nearly 2.8 million birds, mostly chickens and turkeys, had already died. If the pandemic had fizzled out after that first month, it wouldn't have been ultimately a major deal. But instead, this pandemic has escalated dramatically, and here in the second month, if cases continue to spread like wildfire, we'll soon be facing a nightmare of absolutely epic proportions. The confirmation of bird flu at another Iowa egg-laying farm will force the killing of more than 5 million chickens, state officials said Friday. It's the second confirmed case of avian influenza in Buena Vista County, about 160 miles northwest of Des Moines. But the latest outbreak is an operation with 5.3 million chickens. The earlier case was at a farm with about 50,000 turkeys. Just think about that. 5 million chickens suddenly gone. What do you think that's going to do to the price of eggs? The pandemic originally erupted in states on the East Coast, but now is really raging in the middle of the nation. For example, HPAI just spread to 2 more counties in Kansas, and state officials say a strain of bird flu has shown up, according to the Kansas Department of Agriculture, announcing this on Friday. Officials in South Dakota said on Saturday 85,000 birds in 2 state facilities were euthanized amid the state's first avian flu outbreak since 2015. The outbreaks took place on 2 farms in Charles Minks County, located in the southeastern part of the state, where the flu was first detected in turkeys, according to South Dakota Public Broadcasting. Other birds in contact with the turkeys were euthanized as well. Now, interesting that we see the most recent report said at this point in time, since January, there have been 12. Here it is. The Department of Agriculture reports 12.6 million chickens and turkeys have been destroyed in at least 8 states. Now, that's going to affect the food supply. And again, just looking at these things as spokes on a wheel, they're all happening and they're all advancing. The earthquakes, it's interesting to see stories coming out of the media now about the increase in earthquakes and how unusual it is when there's been from the USGS and others around the world, others who monitored the geological activity. This is just a normal cycle. It's the ebb and flow, just a general process that has been going on through history. But now there's people who are sounding the alarm saying, the earth is moving and shaking in ways we've never seen it. So, you combine that with the other things, the pandemic we're seeing, the wars and rumors of wars, the pestilence, all the things that feed into these rising prices and the other things that are going on in our world today. And we need to be looking up. Our redemption is nigh. Now, here's another spoke on the wheel, so to speak, and this comes from Israel 365. Biden says he wants to lead the new world order. After several minutes of self-praise accomplished by citing questionable facts, the article says, the president made a remarkable statement before being hustled away from the podium by his handlers. His administration would be a leader in the, quote, New World Order. This statement was interpreted by one Jerusalem rabbi as a type of euphemism to reduce the world's population. After a convivial speech, the president diverted into strange territory, and this presents us with some significant opportunities to make some fundamental changes. You remember his other partner in crime who said and campaigned on, I want to fundamentally change America, that being Barack Obama. You know, we are at an inflection point. Biden went on to say, I believe in the world economy, not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a closed-door meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we've established a liberal world order, which hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people are dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is the time when things are shifting. There's going to be, Biden said, a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the world, free world, in doing so. The president then called for questions, but the media were immediately ushered out of the room. The National Post wrote about the speech, noting that Biden has a long history of advocating for a new world order. In 1992, then Senator Biden wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal entitled, How I Learned to Love the New World Order. And in the article, Biden, who is also the Senate Foreign Relations Committee of European Affairs Subcommittee, said, having contained Soviet communism until it dissolved, we need a new strategy of containment based like NATO on collective action, but directed against weapons proliferation. In the article, Biden called for increasing the powers of NATO and the UN. And Rabbi Pinchas Winston, a prolific End of Days author, explained that the biblical archetype for the New World Order is the Tower of Babel. Nimrod wanted a new world order that didn't have a God in it, Rabbi Winston explained. A godless world allows for people to do what they want without consequences or moral responsibility. Man ordering society as he wants. The rabbi noted that Biden now represents the extreme left, creating an interesting dichotomy. This is what the anti-religious left wing wants. To the liberals, a godless reality looks like freedom, but it's actually the opposite. Socialism always leads to fascism. Ironically, godlessness is also the goal of the Russian-China alliance. And Putin is anti-God, but condemns Western liberalism as a humanitarian crime. The rabbi went on to say it's impossible to say who is the bad guy, because anytime you take God out of the picture, everyone becomes bad. There's nothing noble about what the U.S. is doing, and certainly nothing noble in what Russia is doing. They're all manifestations of Esav. Russia is Esav's aspect of brute force. Biden is Esav's aspect of treachery and obfuscation, to get what he wants. Both are about power. The elite is getting what they want and throwing off the yoke of heaven. They never have any altruistic or truthful motives. Rabbi Winston said they use nice terms, but they really don't care about anything but power. Spot on, Rabbi. He hits the nail on the head. Now, our next article comes from a group called the Rare Foundation, RAIR, and it says in the headline, The Great Reset, Globalists Capitalize on the Ukraine Crisis, Establish New Surveillance Society. And Peter Thiel has warned citizens about his own AI technology that is now being used in Ukraine, describing it as communist totalitarian technology. Ukraine's defense ministry has started using AI facial recognition technology from the controversial company Clearview. Their supposed objective is to uncover Russian assailants, combat misinformation, and identify the dead. However, as reported previously at Rare Foundation USA, Ukraine is the global tech elite's Great Reset laboratory. Bringing about the Great Reset will require citizens to embrace and trust in the globalist invasive technologies and surveillance. They position their technologies as crisis-relevant technology, which is alleged to be helping protect people and promote the greater good. The World Economic Forum capitalized on the COVID crisis to get people comfortable with health passports and contact tracing. Now, Russia invading Ukraine is their latest crisis to exploit and usher in greater surveillance. Not only are the Ukrainian people being attacked by Russia, but the globalists have launched their own war against its citizens. And the article goes on to talk about associations with the Bilderberg Group and others. And whether or not that's what's actually happening in Ukraine, it makes the point that there is technology that is being employed to advance what the Great Reset's aspirations are in the World Economic Forum, and that is to create this one world order. And looking at these things and all how everything is moving toward that, we know that it's going to happen. But let me remind you that all of those, Peter Thiel and others like him, who promote and move toward this, they're not going to have any role in the rule of the world when this happens. That's going to be one man who takes over, and he's going to have his cronies, but I guarantee it won't be anybody who in any way, shape, or form is deemed to be competition to him. So we are moving in that direction. There's no question. Technology is definitely playing a role. Breitbart has a story that will wrap up our time together here with a couple of stories related to just the bizarre thinking of mankind and the fact that 2 Thessalonians 2 talks about being given over to a delusional mind and to believe lies, and specifically the lie of the Antichrist. But the world is moving in that direction already, to believe things that are just outlandish and ridiculous and anti-science. And Twitter suspends Charlie Kirk for calling a biological male, Rachel Levine, a man. Now, I'm sure you are all familiar and seen pictures of Rachel Levine, a government official who is clearly a male, no matter how he tries to make himself look female. He's not. He's a man. And Turning Point USA founder and conservative firebrand Charlie Kirk has been locked out of his Twitter account until he deletes a tweet about male-to-female transgender assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, Rachel Levine. Richard Levine spent 54 years of his life, Kirk wrote in a tweet. He had a wife and a family. He transitioned to being a woman in 2011. Joe Biden appointed Levine to be a four-star admiral, and now USA Today has named Rachel Levine as a Woman of the Year. Where are the feminists? Delete tweet, Twitter told Kirk in a message. You may not provoke violence against, threaten, or harass any people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease. Now, Twitter says calling a man is inciting violence. Kirk told Breitbart News, Twitter just proved it doesn't believe in truth. It believes in narrative. It doesn't believe in science. It believes in ideology. It doesn't believe in biology. It believes in gender theories. They don't want the truth. They want submission. We cannot give them what they want. The Turning Point USA founder is not the only Twitter user to be locked out of his account for stating that a man is a male, and Kirk's suspension comes after the Christian satire site, the Babylon Bee, was locked out of its account and told to delete a tweet featuring an article mocking USA Today for recently declaring the biological male Rachel Levine a Woman of the Year. The Babylon Bee has remained defiant 24 hours after Twitter locked its account, with the site's CEO Seth Dillon stating, "We're not deleting anything. Truth is not hate speech. If the cost of telling the truth is loss of our Twitter account, then so be it." Here we've got biological male swimmers winning the national championship in swimming, with biological females coming in second, and records being set by biological males in athletic events, female athletic events. It's just so bizarre. And this always reminds me that God is so patient and just long-suffering. He's unwilling that any should perish. And as this world just spirals out of control into lunacy, God is still saving souls. We need to be telling people about Jesus. That's the only hope for this world. And things are not going to turn around. Things are not going to get better. The church is not going to have dominion over the world. The world is going to be as it was in the days of Noah, filled with violence, where the thoughts and intents of man's heart was only evil continually, to where God's divine wrath is the only way to stop man's downward spiral. That's where we're headed. And One of the most formerly family-friendly places in the world is on the bandwagon as well, where Breitbart is reporting that Disney is launching a task force to make more LGBTQ plus content for children and families. A groveling Disney CEO, Bob Chapek, on Monday told employees the company should have condemned Florida's parental rights and education bill that blocked the teaching of sexuality and transgender ideology to students in kindergarten through third grade. Speaking 24 hours before the mutinous staff planned to walk out during a day-long strike. A virtual town hall for employees was used by management to stem internal strife at Disney as the company's chief executive continued to apologize and shifted its public statements about the legislation, which critics falsely call the Don't Say Gay bill. Listen, kindergartners through third graders don't need to be taught anything about sex, period. To say nothing about these transgender and LGBT issues. They don't need to be taught about sex at all. These are little kids. They don't even understand. There's nothing in it for them. It's just simply indoctrination, and there's no other motivation to teach kids about this than indoctrination. We know the moment requires urgency, and words are not enough, said Chapek, according to a recording of his remarks obtained by Reuters. So we're taking some actions right now. One of those actions involved releasing a statement of apology and contrition for past actions, as well as a special task force to develop action plans to make more LGBT-aware content for children and family, according to the Wall Street Journal. Disney Parks Experiences Products is committed to creating experiences that support family values for every family and will not stand for discrimination in any form. We oppose any legislation that infringes on basic human rights. It's a human right to teach trans and LGBTQ ideologies to kindergartners. I didn't know that was a human right. And stand in solidarity and support with our LGBTQIA plus cast, crew, and Imagineers and fans who make their voices heard today and every day. Yes, the world has lost its mind. Also, we know that there is a Supreme Court nomination and the hearings that are taking place right now. And the Christian Headlines reports that SCOTUS nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson asserts that Roe is settled law. Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson on Tuesday called Roe v. Wade and another major abortion case settled law, adding that they have been reaffirmed by the nation's highest court multiple times and are binding. Jackson made the comments during the opening day of questions from the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is expected to vote on her nomination in the coming days before sending it to the full body. President Biden nominated her to replace retiring Stephen Breyer. Jackson's remarks about Roe are similar to those made by Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett in their Senate hearings. Both were nominated by a Republican president. It is assumed, though, that the judicial philosophy of Jackson would be different from that of Kavanaugh and Barrett. Senator Dianne Feinstein had asked Jackson to discuss Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992, which upheld Roe. I do agree with both Justice Kavanaugh and Barrett on the issue. Jackson told Feinstein, Roe and Casey are the settled law of the Supreme Court concerning the right to terminate a woman's pregnancy. They have established a framework that the court has reaffirmed, and in order to revisit, as Justice Barrett said, the Supreme Court looks at various factors because of the decisis is a very important, stare decisis is a very important process. It's a legal doctrine the courts will adhere to precedent in making their decisions. Isn't it a tragic thing that this is even on the table? That there's even a discussion to make this a right protected by law, that someone can take the life of another human being because it's inside of their womb. And, you know, that child has its own DNA. It's got two contributors that created a third set of DNA and all the chromosomal arrangements that determine whether it's a male or a female, the XX or the XY. And all these things are already happening inside a mother's womb. And fingernails are growing and eyelashes are forming and the heart's beating and all these other things. And yet people are saying, we want to stand up for the right to end this human life. Again, God is so patient and so long-suffering. Christian Headlines reports, sadly, out of my own home state of California, California bill earmarks funds for out-of-state women seeking abortions in the Golden State. California bill could earmark taxpayer money for women who live out of state and are seeking to obtain abortions in the state of California. Democratic Senators Ana Caballero and Nancy Skinner introduced Senate Bill 1142 last week in California. And under the bill, California Health and Human Services Agency or similar agencies would be responsible for updating a website where the public could easily find information on abortion services. The bill would also create an abortion practical support fund and require the commission to administer the abortion practical support fund for the purpose of providing grants upon appropriation by the legislature to assist pregnant people who are low income or face other financial barriers with access to abortions in California, and for research to support equitable access to abortion. The bill comes as lawmakers say they are worried that the landmark Roe v. Wade case, which legalized abortion, could be overturned soon. The Supreme Court is scheduled to rule on this in the Mississippi case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. If the court rules in favor of the state and upholds the state's 15-week abortion ban, the ruling could reverse or at least weaken Roe v. Wade, and I hope it does. But California, what's wrong with you? It's just incredible what's happened up in Sacramento. And, we here in California, it's been a long time since we've enjoyed some sanity in Sacramento. And thinking back to the Reagan days, and he had his critics too. My wife and I look back fondly on those days as he is our governor, and then later as our president. And we've just moved to Wonkyville, if pardon that. But it's just stunning, the things that we're seeing going on in the world today. Now, I want to wrap up with one last story. And, we've got two things that happened during the tribulation period. We've got a mountain burning with fire that falls into the ocean, and it's thrown into the sea, which indicates it comes from space. It isn't a volcano that falls into the ocean. No volcano is big enough that would fall into the ocean to have the impact that this meteor strike has, which is what I believe it is, or an asteroid, I should say. And we also have a comet strike that poisons a third of the fresh water supply, and it's a great star called Wormwood. Now, what we have to recognize is this aster, the Greek term used there, is just a heavenly body. Can't be a star. No star could get within, several million miles of the Earth without just burning it to a crisp. Stars are hugely massive. Even the smaller stars are bigger than the Earth. And so this can't be a star in the sense that we know it, but it's a bright heavenly body that falls to the Earth. Now, here's why I wanted to point this out. And I find myself watching these things, near Earth objects and Earth approaching objects. And I got this actually from the NASA JPL website. And NASA system predicts impact of a small asteroid. Now, this has already happened, but here's why I wanted to mention this. Asteroid 2022 EB5 was too small to pose a hazard to Earth, but its discovery marks the fifth time that any asteroid has been observed before impacting into the atmosphere. This is only the fifth time that they've spotted something on the way that was going to interact with the Earth, either hit the surface of the Earth or burn up in the atmosphere. And a small asteroid hit Earth's atmosphere over the Norwegian Sea before disintegrating on March 11, 2022. But this event wasn't a complete surprise. Astronomers knew it was on a collision course, predicting exactly where and when the impact would happen. Now, get this. Here's why I wanted to highlight this and underscore the point that, listen, we don't have to see the meteor that's going to strike the Earth or the comet that's going to poison a third of the world's freshwater supply. We don't have to see them coming. Because, as I just read, astronomers knew it was on a collision course. You know when they knew it was on a collision course? An hour and 58 minutes before it interacted with the atmosphere and burned up. K. Sarnecki at the Piscatero Observatory in northern Hungary first reported observations of the small object 2 hours before the asteroid made impact. And this is the Minor Planet Center, the internationally recognized clearinghouse for the position measurements of small celestial bodies. The object was posted on the Minor Planet Center's Near-Earth Object Confirmation page to flag it for additional observations that would confirm it was a previously unknown asteroid. What kind of notice did they get? 1 hour, 58 minutes that it was coming. Listen, there's a couple of things that are lurking out there that are going to hit the earth during the tribulation. And the one is John was trying to describe it in language that would be understood in any generation. He calls it a great mountain burning with fire thrown into the sea, coming into our atmosphere from outer space, and then this star wormwood that makes bitter the waters of the earth. And I believe that's speaking of radiation poisoning, which would happen if a comet were to break up. Remember, comets are largely gas and ice, and where meteors are mostly iron. So one would be a physical impact. The other, if it's gas and ice, would break up. If it's a large comet that enters our atmosphere and it breaks up, then it would scatter like rain all over the planet and thus have the capacity to poison a third of the Earth's water supply. But with this being as frightening of a thing as it is to consider, I'll remind you we won't be here. And we are going to be caught up in a moment in a twinkling of an eye before any of this can possibly happen. And that's one of the other things we're going to talk about on Sunday, the necessity of the pre-tribulation rapture. So I encourage you once again to tune in. So listen, this last story and the others associated with it, the degradation of human morality, all the things we see should be a motivation to us to tell people about the Lord and to lead them to Christ through our sowing of seed. And I was telling the church on Sunday, we're not responsible for the reception. And, so many times people are well, what if somebody thinks I'm crazy? Or what if they don't, receive the message? Well, you have no responsibility to the receptivity of the soil. Now, we're just told, and through the parable of the soils, that Jesus taught, 3 of the 4 soils were not receptive, or they were immediately receptive, and then because of tribulation that comes from following the word of God, they basically walked away or were choked out. So we're not responsible for the reception of the gospel. We're just responsible to preach it. And so go tell people about Jesus this week, man. Things are wrapping up. And it's just an incredible time to be alive. It is an exciting time to be alive. And we are watching, I believe, precursors to the tribulation events. And I haven't reminded you of this in a while, but I will today. You're living around people who are going to go into the tribulation, I believe. I believe we're that close. So maybe we ought to be telling them the things that are going to be coming and not be ashamed of the gospel. And, part of the Bible is prophecy. The testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy, is what Revelation tells us. So we shouldn't be afraid to say the things that we know and see that are coming upon the whole world. And, within that package, we need to be telling people God loves you and he has sent his son to save you and cover your sins with the blood of his own son, that you might be saved and live with him forever. So let's tell the whole story. The whole story is judgment is coming, but there's a way to avoid it. And it is exclusively through Jesus Christ, not religious activity, not good works or moral behavior. It is exclusively by the blood of the Lamb. Well, that's it for today. I hope you can join us Saturday again for the roundtable, and the topic being the silent pulpit. And then again, Sunday morning, please join us for our message about some of the things that cause confusion related to Bible prophecy. And we'll be discussing some of the big questions that often pop up online. I bet they'll even pop up in the chat room on Saturday. But hopefully we'll see you at those 2 times online. And so again, thankful to meet so many of you in person over the years and months of doing conferences. But as we close each and every one of our sessions together, I'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.